Subscribers to In the Beginning receive carefully researched ebooks, detailed videos showing real woodworking projects built step by step, and access to exclusive timber-related material that isn't published publicly. The purpose is to document how wood actually behaves over time, using historical practice and material evidence rather than modern assumptions. There is a persistent misunderstanding about historical timber that needs to be corrected early. Viking Age wood was not stronger because trees were larger, forests were wilder, or craftsmen were somehow more gifted. The real advantage came from a harvesting rule that modern forestry almost completely ignores. That rule didn't make wood harder immediately. It made it harden slowly, quietly, over decades and centuries. Most modern wood never gets the chance to do that. The difference begins long before a tool touches the timber. Viking builders treated the moment a tree was cut as the beginning of its aging, not the end of its life. In much of the modern world, harvesting marks the end of the tree's relevance. The goal is to process it as quickly as possible into usable lumber. Viking Age builders saw felling as the start of a long transformation. The tree was no longer living, but its internal processes didn't stop overnight. They understood, through observation, that wood continued to change after cutting. Moisture migrated, resins hardened, fibers tightened. If the conditions were right, the material improved rather than degraded. This understanding shaped when, how, and where trees were harvested. The rule centered on cutting during deep dormancy and exposing timber slowly to cold air. Trees were harvested during the coldest part of the year, when sap movement was at its lowest. This reduced internal moisture and sugar content from the start. Lower sugars meant less biological activity. Lower moisture meant slower, more controlled shrinkage. Cold air mattered just as much as timing. Timber was often left exposed to winter conditions before being worked. Freezing temperatures slowed decay organisms while encouraging gradual moisture loss. This wasn't about speed, it was about restraint. Slow moisture loss allowed fibers to tighten instead of tearing apart. Wood shrinks as it dries, but how it shrinks determines whether it gains strength or loses it. Rapid drying causes the outer fibers to contract while inner fibers resist, creating internal fractures. Slow drying allows fibers to settle together. Viking timber often dried over years, not months. As moisture left the cell walls gradually, the fibers compressed and locked together more tightly. This increased density and resistance to deformation. The wood didn't become harder in a dramatic way. It became quieter under stress. Resins and extractives played a critical role in long-term hardening. Many of the species used by Viking builders, especially pine and spruce, contain natural resins. When trees are cut during dormancy and dried slowly in cold conditions, these resins migrate and harden within the wood. Over time, this resin crystallization increased resistance to moisture intrusion and biological attack. It also stiffened the wood structure, making it more resistant to compression and wear. Modern kiln drying interrupts this process. Resins are driven out or redistributed too quickly to perform the same function. Salt air and cold climates unintentionally reinforce the process. In coastal regions, timber was often stored or used in environments rich in salt air. Salt inhibited fungal growth and further slowed decay. Cold temperatures limited insect activity. This combination allowed timber to age in place. Wood used in ships, halls, and storage buildings continued to harden as resins cured and moisture, equilibrated with the environment. The material adapted to its surroundings rather than fighting them. Viking builders accepted movement early to gain stability later. Fresh timber moved. It checked. It twisted slightly. Viking builders expected this and accounted for it. Joints were designed to tolerate early movement without failure. Once the timber settled, movement decreased significantly. The structure became more stable with age, not less. Modern construction often demands immediate stability, which, honestly, sacrifices long-term calm. Hardness was a result of time under load, not just drying. Timber that carries weight slowly changes. Under constant load, fibers compress and align. This process, known today as creep, was well understood in practice. Viking longhouses and ships placed timber under continuous stress. Over decades, beams adapted to their loads. Properly harvested and seasoned wood responded by becoming more resistant to further deformation. Poorly processed wood fails under the same conditions. mistakes happened, and they taught valuable lessons. Not all Viking timber survived. Wood, cut at the wrong time, stored poorly, or used in unsuitable environments decayed faster. Builders learned which combinations worked and which didn't. This feedback loop refined harvesting practices over generations. What survived became the standard, what failed quietly disappeared from use. Survival was the measure, not theory. Modern forestry removed time from the equation. Industrial harvesting treats wood as a short-term material. Trees are felled year-round, drying is accelerated, storage is minimized. The result is lumber that reaches usable moisture content quickly but, honestly, lacks long-term structural maturity. It performs well initially, but degrades sooner under repeated stress and environmental exposure. The Viking rule wasn't about mysticism, it was about patience. Surviving Viking timber confirms the pattern. Archaeological finds show shipped timbers, tools, and structural members that harden significantly over time. In some cases, the wood is measurably denser than comparable modern material from the same species. This isn't because ancient trees were magical, it's because the conditions allowed the wood to complete its transformation. The material finished becoming what it was capable of becoming. The lesson is not to copy Vikings, but to understand what they respected. Modern builders can't recreate Viking conditions exactly. Forests, climates, and construction demands have changed, but the principles remain valid. Wood benefits from slow transitions. It rewards patience. It strengthens when allowed to settle gradually under real conditions. Ignoring this doesn't stop the process, it just shortens it. Harder wood is often quieter wood. The most durable timber doesn't announce its strength. It doesn't resist violently. It absorbs stress and releases it slowly. Viking builders selected for this quality without naming it. They recognized it by outcome. Understanding this helps modern woodworkers judge material beyond appearance and specifications. This knowledge still matters because time hasn't changed how wood works. Cellulose still shrinks the same way. Lignin still responds to load the same way. Moisture still governs decay. What has changed is how willing we are to wait. If you want to continue exploring how historical timber practices explain what survives and what fails, consider subscribing to the In the Beginning email list. This kind of understanding isn't about reenactment or nostalgia. It's about learning from material that has already proven what works, and choosing to work with wood in a way that respects what it needs to endure.